This man was convicted of slaughtering 7 individuals, including his own children. He still had the audacity to blow a kiss at the camera, as if nothing had happened. That eerie moment alone cements him as one of the most cold-blooded mass murderers in New Zealand's history, and his name is Raymond Wahia Radama, a man whose actions shook the peaceful town of Masterton, where people had believed they were safe. At that time, Masterton was a small, close-knit community celebrated for its rural charm. Situated in the Wairarapa region, the town was encircled by green farmland and rolling hills, creating a serene landscape. The local economy primarily relied on agriculture, particularly sheep farming, which was a leading industry. Many residents were employed in farming or related sectors, such as wool processing, small manufacturing, and retail. Life there moved at a slow and predictable pace. Violent crime was uncommon. Beneath this seemingly pleasant exterior, however, economic difficulties were beginning to emerge. In the early 1990s, New Zealand was dealing with the consequences of economic reforms from the previous decade. Many families, especially those in working-class areas like Masterton, were feeling the strain of increasing unemployment and financial insecurity. Job opportunities were limited, wages were low, and support from welfare programs was often insufficient. For someone like Radama, who was already struggling to support his family, these challenges only heightened his frustration and desperation. At 25, Radama and his wife, Toni, were overwhelmed by financial stress, making it difficult to keep up with rising rent costs. With 3 young children to care for, they had to move in with Toni's parents on Judd Street in Masterton. Living with extended family was challenging, the house was cramped, tensions were high. Arguments became more common, emotions flared, and resentment grew. Over the months, his frustration intensified, driven not only by financial difficulties but also by a sense of powerlessness and rejection as he watched his life fall apart. He sought help from social services in hopes of finding support and a way to recover, but the assistance he needed never materialized. Left alone with his despair, his feelings transformed into a deep, violent rage. By June, Radama's marriage had completely collapsed. A serious conflict involving Radama, his wife, and her family marked the final breaking point. He was expelled from their home, feeling rejected and isolated, with nowhere to turn for help. As he struggled with insomnia, wandered alone, consumed by anger and hopelessness, he reached a terrifying conclusion: if he couldn't have his family, then no one else would. On the night of June 26, 1992, Toni went out to meet her parents, Philip and Tubby Ferguson, at a local pub, leaving her 3 young sons, Karipi, Barney, and Stacy, with her sister, Nicola, 20. Also present in the house were Toni's brother, Philip Ferguson Jr., 14, Mikola's partner, Bevan Tepu, 21, and their young son, Stephen, 3. That night, Raymond Radama returned home armed with a knife and a softball bat. He violently attacked everyone inside, killing 7 people through stabbing and bludgeoning. Tragically, his own children were among the victims. In a disturbing move, he placed their bodies on his wife's bed and covered them with a Bible, as if seeking forgiveness. The bodies of the adults were also piled together in another bedroom, creating a horrifying scene that was difficult to comprehend. But Radama's bloodlust was not yet satisfied. He sat in the house, waiting for Toni and her parents to return so he could finish what he had started. When they finally walked through the door, the nightmare continued. Nicola's father, Philip, was the first to be attacked. Radama swung the softball bat with full force, striking him in a brutal assault. This time, however, things did not go according to plan. In the chaos, Toni managed to escape, running for her life to call for help. When the police arrived, the carnage they witnessed would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Blood soaked the floors, and lifeless bodies filled the rooms. In the midst of it all was Raymond Radama, subdued, and he was no longer in control. Toni's father, Philip, had overpowered him, preventing a greater tragedy. The news of the massacre spread like wildfire. New Zealand had never seen such a horrifying crime. A father, a husband, a son-in-law, someone who was supposed to protect his family, had instead wiped them out in cold blood. The community of Masterton was left reeling, struggling to understand how something so monstrous could have happened in their quiet town. Radama was arrested at the scene and taken into custody. His initial demeanor was eerily calm, as if he had accepted his fate. He offered little resistance, making no attempt to flee. During questioning, he showed minimal emotion, providing cold, matter-of-fact responses. Investigators were disturbed by his apparent lack of remorse. When Radama stood trial in 1993, the nation watched in shock. He expressed remorse, but the sheer brutality of his crimes left many wondering if it was genuine or merely an attempt to save himself from the harshest punishment. During the trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a man who had allowed his rage and feelings of inadequacy to fester for too long. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Radama had been pushed to his breaking point due to financial strain and rejection by his wife's family. Mental health professionals were brought in to assess his state of mind, but ultimately, the jury saw through any justifications. The judge described the killings as unimaginable. Radama was sentenced to life imprisonment for 7 counts of murder. Additionally, he was given 10 years for the killing of an unborn child and another 7 years for attempted murder. Even behind bars, the horror of what he had done did not fade. The parole board repeatedly denied his bids for release, citing his continued struggles with banned substance abuse. In 2008, the board noted that despite presenting himself as a reformed man in previous hearings, Radama had relapsed into cannabis use, blaming his actions on a dark day in his past. Year after year, Radama has stood before the parole board pleading for his release. He insists that he has changed, that he has grown, and that he is no longer the man he was when he committed those horrific crimes. Yet, each time, the board has denied his requests, stating the same concerns: his psychological state, his risk to society, and his lack of true remorse. It has now been more than 30 years since Radama was sentenced, and despite numerous parole hearings, the board remains unconvinced that he is fit to re-enter the world outside prison walls. Radama has been denied parole not just once or twice, but a total of 14 times. His repeated attempts to gain freedom have been met with the same result. His lawyer, Roger Eagles, has now taken a different approach, claiming that there is potential bias in the parole process. Eagles argues that one of the parole board members, Professor Phil Brynd, had previously prepared psychological reports on Radama in 1992, and his involvement in the current parole decisions could create an unfair assessment. He points out that Brynd is the only person on the board who has had extensive personal interaction with Radama, which could lead to preconceived judgments rather than an objective evaluation of Radama's progress over the past 3 decades. The legal challenge does not stop there. Eagles has also argued that Radama's repeated parole denials are evidence of bias. He claims that despite Radama undergoing rehabilitation programs and counseling, the board has never granted him a single opportunity for conditional release, raising concerns about whether he is being treated unfairly compared to other prisoners with similar convictions. However, the parole board has maintained its stance, insisting that every hearing is based on up-to-date psychological evaluations and risk assessments rather than relying on reports from the past. They argue that Radama's continued imprisonment is not the result of bias, but rather the outcome of his failure to meet the necessary criteria for release. Another point of contention in Radama's case is the way his parole hearings have been conducted. Eagles has argued that previous hearings have gone off track, with the board focusing too much on questioning Radama about his motivations for the crimes and the impact on his victims. He claims that the discussions have shifted from evaluating whether Radama is fit for release to revisiting his past, which should not be the central focus of the hearings. Eagles contends that while it is understandable for the board to consider the severity of Radama's crimes, parole decisions should be based on his rehabilitation and risk factors in the present, rather than continuously re-examining the past. In 2021, it was revealed that Radama had begun a relationship with a woman who had suffered childhood trauma. The board expressed concerns about this relationship, fearing that it could trigger another violent episode given Radama's history and the emotional volatility that played a role in his past actions. The board was deeply troubled by this revelation and questioned whether Radama was capable of forming healthy relationships, or if this new connection was a sign of unresolved psychological issues. Despite attending nearly 100 sessions with a psychologist, board members still believed Radama lacked insight into his crimes, which made them skeptical of his ability to maintain a stable and responsible relationship outside of prison. The concern was not just about Radama himself, but also about the potential harm that could come to his partner if he were released without proper safeguards in place. During one of his parole hearings, Radama made a statement that only reinforced the board's concerns. He claimed that he had loved his children and believed he was putting them in a better place by taking their lives. This statement sent chills down the spines of the parole board members, as it suggested that Radama still harbored a distorted sense of justification for his actions, rather than fully accepting the gravity of his crimes. His words implied that he had once rationalized these actions as an act of mercy. The board saw this as a major red flag, indicating that Radama had not yet reached a true understanding of his past actions or the level of self-awareness and accountability required for parole consideration. Despite these concerns, reports from inside the prison indicate that Radama has generally maintained good behavior. He has been described as respectful within the prison environment, and there have been positive reports about his work while incarcerated. Additionally, corrections officials have stated that there is no further need for additional rehabilitation programs, as Radama has already completed the necessary courses. However, even with these positive notes, the parole board has remained firm in its decision to keep him behind bars, stating that good behavior in a controlled environment does not necessarily translate to safe behavior in the outside world. In his most recent parole hearing in 2024, Radama made a significant admission. For the first time in over 3 decades, he acknowledged that the killings were intentional. This directly contradicted his previous claims. While this confession marked a departure from his earlier statements, it still failed to provide clarity on the most crucial question: why? Despite finally admitting his intent, Radama refused to explain his motives. During the hearing, he expressed deep regret, stating, "I was a very selfish man for what I did. All I can say is that I really regret wholeheartedly the decision that I made in order to kill all those many children and adults. I hate myself for what I've done." However, the parole board remained skeptical. They pointed out that his changing narrative over the years only raised further concerns about his credibility. Given his history of inconsistent explanations, the board questioned whether this newfound admission was genuine or simply another attempt to manipulate the system in his favor. The victims' families continue to oppose his release, maintaining that Radama has never fully explained his actions or shown true remorse to them. His admissions mean little without an honest, clear acknowledgement of why he did what he did. Many still believe that Radama poses a danger to society and should never be granted parole. In response to these concerns, the board recommended that Radama be transferred to a special treatment unit for violent offenders. However, he resisted the move, arguing that it would be a step backward in his rehabilitation rather than a constructive measure. Despite his efforts, the parole board once again denied Radama's release. The ruling made it clear that while his latest statement represented a shift, it was not enough to justify granting him freedom. The board emphasized that public safety remained their top priority and that Radama's risk factors had not diminished to a satisfactory level. For now, Raymond Wayne Radama remains in prison, and his next parole eligibility will come in April 2025. Whether he will finally succeed in persuading the board remains uncertain. However, given his long history of denied applications, changing statements, and ongoing concerns from the victims' families, his path to release remains as difficult as ever. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Belinda Temple. 1986 was the year Belinda started her college education in her hometown. Unlike her twin sister Brenda, who attended Steve Austin University, Belinda stayed close to home. Her decision was largely influenced by her relationship with Marshall Kelmy, who was 3 years her senior. Belinda was deeply infatuated with Marshall, and this relationship began during her high school years. However, Belinda's parents were not in favor of this relationship. They feared that being involved with Marshall would hinder their daughter's opportunities for a prestigious education. They also worried about the potential consequences of an early pregnancy, which might lead to Belinda dropping out of college altogether. The disapproval of Belinda's parents led to numerous arguments at home. Belinda's mother was particularly opposed to the idea of her daughter moving in with Marshall before marriage. She made her stance clear by stating, "He is nobody to you. Once you're married, you can move out, but until then, you have a home here." This remark seemed to only strengthen Belinda's resolve. In a bold move, Belinda and Marshall announced their decision to get married during a family dinner. Despite the tension, they shared their plans, which was met with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Belinda's mother was visibly upset but seemed resigned to their decision, gritting her teeth and remaining silent for the rest of the evening. In reality, Belinda had made up her mind to marry Marshall as a way to assert her independence and prove to her parents that she was capable of making her own decisions. They didn't have a grand wedding celebration. Belinda wore her sister's white dress, invited a few close friends, and she and Marshall signed the papers. Afterward, they strolled around the city, enjoying champagne and each other's company. The next day, Belinda packed her belongings and moved in with her husband, who was still living with his parents. They hadn't planned to rent a separate place. Getting married didn't change much in their relationship. As mentioned earlier, Belinda's primary reason for marrying was to gain independence and stop her mother's nagging. However, her new life turned out to be quite unpleasant. Less than 6 months later, Marshall started spending less time at home, claiming he was working late. In reality, he was seeing another woman. Belinda discovered this when she noticed her husband acting strangely. One day, she waited until his work hours ended and followed him, which is when the truth came to light. She saw Marshall walking hand in hand with a woman she didn't know, likely a colleague. The deceived wife, Belinda, left her husband, Marshall, after discovering his infidelity. She didn't create a scene, but instead packed her belongings and returned to her mother's house. Marshall tried to win her back, but Belinda was too proud to forgive him. They eventually got a divorce. A few years later, Belinda was pregnant and working part-time at a school. Despite her pregnancy, she was concerned about missing the upcoming basketball competition between schools and not being able to prepare her team properly. Her colleague, Richard Bachman, didn't share her enthusiasm and had often expressed his disinterest in teaching. Belinda couldn't understand why Bachman, a 40-year-old man who seemed uninvested in his job, still held his position. As a diligent teacher, Belinda noticed that one of her students, Riley Joe Sanders, a high school senior, had been absent from class for months. She reached out to her colleagues to determine if the issue was specific to her class or if Sanders was a habitual truant. Her colleagues told her that Sanders came from a troubled home and rarely attended school, implying that his absences were not Belinda's problem. That evening, Belinda decided to take further action. She visited Riley Joe Sanders' mother, who lived nearby, and had a serious conversation with her. Although the talk seemed to have an impact, it didn't quite yield the results Belinda had hoped for. Sanders began attending class and participating on an equal level with his peers. However, during a basketball game, when Belinda called out Sanders for pushing an opponent and exhibiting poor behavior, he responded with insults and threats, warning her to be careful, especially in the evenings. After her breakup with Marshall, Belinda had nothing left for her in her hometown. She decided to follow her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University. It was there that Belinda found her true calling. Alongside her studies, she worked part-time as a basketball coach and had high aspirations. At the same university, Belinda met David Temple. Like her, he was a part-time coach but for soccer, and he also played for the university team as its captain. Soccer had been an integral part of David's life since childhood, and it was clear even then that he was destined to excel. He consistently performed well for his team, earning the respect of all his teachers. Despite his difficult nature, which could lead him to insult or even physically confront others, David's behavior was often overlooked because of his on-field performance. During games, he would become fully engaged and find it difficult to calm down for a long time afterward. However, one of his teammates later revealed that David's aggressive behavior was due to his use of steroids. David's behavior changed significantly when he was with Belinda. He became a caring and chivalrous partner, but with one major caveat: he would become aggressive and confrontational if he perceived anyone as a threat to their relationship. Belinda was well received by David's parents, who admired her love for sports, a common interest she shared with their son. However, Belinda's twin sister and friends were less than thrilled about her relationship with David. They had known Belinda as a strong-willed and independent person, but since being with David, she had become more subdued and focused on pleasing him. Her relationship with her family also suffered, with less frequent phone calls and visits, which naturally caused concern among her loved ones. As graduation approached, David and Belinda adopted a bull terrier named Shaq. After receiving their diplomas, they got married in 1999. January 1999, David and Belinda Temple were expecting their second child. With the due date nearing, doctors predicted Belinda would go into labor within a couple of weeks. As with many pregnant women, Belinda was frequently exhausted, and caring for their son Evan added to her fatigue. One evening, David decided to give his wife a break from household chores and allow her some rest. To minimize distractions, David took Evan for a walk in the park. As they strolled through the fresh air, their hunger grew, so they stopped at a cafe for a snack. After their cafe visit, David and Evan headed home. Upon arrival, David noticed the front door had broken glass. He quickly told Evan, "I'm going to take you to visit Harland for a bit, okay?" Without waiting for Evan's response, David led him to a neighbor's house, where family friends lived. Evan, struggling to keep up, asked, "Why can't we go to Mom's?" David, unsure of how to respond, said, "Mom's in the hospital right now." The neighbor, Quentin Harland, had just opened the door to unexpected visitors when David rushed past him, taking his son into the living room without a word. David then ran towards his own house, leaving Quentin confused. Quentin shouted to his wife to care for the child and followed David. "What's going on?" Quentin asked, but before David could respond, they reached David's house, where Quentin saw the front door was broken. Upon entering, Quentin saw the house was in disarray, with open closets and belongings scattered everywhere. A trail of blood led to the stairs, prompting Quentin to push David aside. Under the stairs, in the dressing room, they found Belinda lying face down with a severe head wound. David, seemingly in shock, didn't react. Instead, he took out his phone and called the police. Police officers quickly arrived at the scene, but they were initially unable to enter the house due to the Temple family's aggressive bull terrier, Shaq, who growled and barked at the unfamiliar men in uniform. One officer drew his gun in response, but David intervened, shouting at them to put their guns away and rushing to restrain the dog in the garage. Upon entering the house, the police assessed the scene and concluded that the perpetrators were likely burglars who had not expected Belinda to be home. Despite her pregnancy, they had shot her to eliminate her as a witness. When police started investigating a crime scene, they were baffled by how the burglar got past the fierce dog, Shaq, that guarded the house. They were also unsure how the perpetrator distracted the dog. Upon closer inspection of the front door, police found broken glass, but its positioning suggested it was broken while the door was already unlocked, which seemed strange. Inside the living room, a box on the nightstand caught their eye, containing jewelry such as earrings, rings, and a gold chain. What puzzled them was why the thief left the jewelry untouched. As police spent more time in the Temple family home, they became increasingly convinced that the whole scene was staged. In their experience, thieves usually take all valuables they can carry, but in this case, nothing appeared to be missing. The presence of the dog continued to raise suspicions, leaving them feeling that something was off. Regarding the murder, Belinda was shot in the back of the head with what was likely a 12-gauge shotgun while kneeling with their back to the killer. However, shotguns are an unusual choice for robbers due to their bulk and difficulty in concealing and transporting. This, combined with the fact that the murder took place at 4 p.m., makes it improbable that a thief would be openly carrying a shotgun at that time of day. When questioned by police about firearms in his home, David mentioned owning a couple of rifles, which he showed to the officers. Notably, the shotgun that could have been used in Belinda's murder was not among the firearms he presented. David went to the police station voluntarily to give a statement and detail the items that had been stolen. Despite appearing nervous, he was cooperative with the police. During this time, his son Evan stayed at Quentin's house, oblivious to what had happened. In 1996, David Temple and Quentin Harland were neighbors and co-workers at a school. They were close friends and often socialized together outside of work, watching sports and hosting barbecues with their families. However, their friendship became strained when Heather Scott, a new teacher, joined the school. Quentin was attracted to Heather, but she rejected his invitation to dinner. What Quentin didn't know was that David had also developed feelings for Heather, and they started a secret relationship. Quentin was angry and hurt when he found out that his married friend, who had a son, was involved with someone else. Despite his feelings, Quentin kept David secret, even as their co-workers began to notice the romantic connection between David and Heather outside of school. Heather didn't know that David was married, as he didn't wear a wedding ring and kept his personal life private. Belinda had no idea about David's secret life. She once confided in Quentin about her suspicions that David was cheating on her, but Quentin quickly dismissed her concerns. "You're just being paranoid," he told her. "David is a devoted husband and family man. How could you think such a thing?" However, there were signs that something was off. David, who had once been extremely respectful towards Belinda, now frequently insulted her, even in front of others. He would call her fat, despite her only gaining a little weight after childbirth, and would often ask her to leave the room when they had guests, implying that her appearance was embarrassing. Belinda didn't stand up for herself or have a serious conversation with David about his behavior. Instead, she cried at night and felt deeply unhappy as a woman. Meanwhile, David was enjoying his new relationship with Heather. David became increasingly estranged from his family due to a new relationship with a coworker. He put more psychological pressure on his wife, Belinda, and their communication consisted only of insults. Although he never physically harmed her, the verbal abuse continued. That year, Belinda discovered she was pregnant again. The news made her forgive David's past transgressions, and she felt ecstatic. David attempted to appear as a happy father, but it seemed insincere. Sometimes, he would not come home at night, and Belinda was afraid to ask why because she feared his angry outbursts and the potential scandal that could follow. A pregnant Belinda often asked her husband David for help in preparing for the baby's birth, such as running errands, fixing up the nursery, and installing shelves. However, David consistently ignored her requests, leaving Belinda to handle everything on her own, including shopping, painting, and assembling furniture, despite being 8 months pregnant. As Christmas approached, Belinda suggested discussing gift ideas with David, but he proposed skipping gifts that year to save money for the baby. Given the doctor's warning that Belinda might go into premature labor, this seemed like a reasonable decision. However, on Christmas, David didn't even get Belinda a small gift. Instead, he announced that he was leaving to spend the New Year's holidays with friends on a hunting trip. Belinda confided in her sister, who immediately changed her plans to be with Belinda, ensuring she wouldn't feel abandoned, especially since labor could start at any moment. David, during the holidays, spent the time with Heather, who wore a gold necklace given to her by David as a Christmas gift. By 2007, It appeared that David Temple had all but moved on from his wife's murder, as if Belinda had never been a part of his life. The fact that it had been 5 years since the murder and the killer had yet to be caught seemed of little concern to him. He had married Heather in 2001, and together they were raising Evan. The police suspected David of wrongdoing, but they couldn't gather enough evidence to prove anything. While investigating the case files of burglaries in the neighborhood, they discovered that a house on the next street had been burglarized 8 days before the murder at the Temple house. The perpetrator was none other than Riley Joe Sanders, a persistent truant from the school where Belinda taught, who had previously threatened her. He was called in for questioning immediately. Riley had no alibi for the day of the murder, and his father owned a 12-gauge shotgun. However, when the police searched the Sanders house, they did not find the weapon. Realizing the police had reason to detain him, Riley confessed that he was with friends on the day of the murder. He had hidden this information because they were smoking pot in a large group, and he did not want to implicate his friends. As a result, the charge against Riley was dropped. In November 2004, police officers arrived at David's doorstep, handcuffed him, and informed him that he was being held on suspicion of murdering Belinda Temple. David denied the allegations. His trial began in 2007. The investigation revealed that David's motive for the crime was his new relationship with Heather. Colleagues of David testified that during Belinda's pregnancy, he boasted about replacing his fat and pregnant wife with the younger and more attractive Heather. According to the prosecution, David killed Belinda as soon as she returned home from work, as evidenced by her still wearing her work uniform and shoes. They alleged that he then staged a robbery, scattering belongings around the house, before quickly driving to the park with his son to create an alibi. The prosecution also highlighted several suspicious facts, including that nothing was stolen from the house, and a fierce dog in the yard would have prevented any stranger from entering. Furthermore, witnesses reported seeing David's car stopped near a rice paddy, where the murder weapon was likely discarded, with only his son Evan present in the vehicle at the time. However, the shotgun was never found in the area where the crime occurred. Heather testified that before Belinda's murder, her relationship with David was not serious, and she didn't even love him. This statement introduced uncertainty into the jury's decision, as it raised questions about David's motive. Would he really kill his wife over a non-serious relationship, or was Heather lying to protect him? In November 2007, David was sentenced to life in prison. 2 years later, a friend of Riley Sanders came forward to the police to clear David's conscience. According to this friend, Riley had previously confided in him about taking his father's shotgun with the intention of robbing the Temple family home. Riley wanted to teach his teacher, David Temple, a lesson. Riley claimed that he had almost entered the house, but was thwarted by a bull terrier that ran out of the garage. He shot at the dog but missed, and fearing the noise would attract neighbors, he quickly ran away. This new testimony was submitted to the court, prompting a review of the case. David was released from prison on bail while the review was underway. Meanwhile, Heather decided she no longer wanted to be married to someone who had spent so much time in jail and whose future was uncertain. She filed for divorce. The jury took a long time to deliberate on David's sentence. The case wasn't revisited until 2023, when David was still awaiting a final decision on his sentence. David was ultimately convicted and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Throughout the trial, his son Evan struggled to accept that his father was capable of committing such a heinous crime. Evan continued to support his father until the very end. Laura Peacher, 28, was last seen on October 16, 2018, dining at a bar in Sebring. 3 days later, a restaurant employee in Tampa called 911 after finding something suspicious near a dumpster. Laura was a vibrant and social woman. She was born in Michigan in 1989, had an older sister and brother. Laura was born with a short left arm, featuring a thumb and 2 fingers. Throughout her life, she faced discrimination due to her physical difference, but she persevered and remained positive. Laura worked as a job coach at Goodwill, supporting individuals with physical and mental disabilities. Despite her own challenges, her disability was just a part of her unique character. Laura grew up in Michigan before moving to Sebring, Florida, at age 26. She relocated to assist her aging grandmother, demonstrating her caring nature by leaving her job to be there for family. On the morning of October 19, 2018, a 911 call was made by restaurant employees who discovered a woman's body near a dumpster behind their establishment. They reported a foul odor, initially suspecting it was from a dead animal. Upon closer inspection, they found what appeared to be a deceased woman. When detectives arrived, they found the victim face down, partially undressed, with a plastic bag over her head, part of the body covered by a wooden board. She was identified as Laura Peacher, wearing a dress that had been pulled down below her breasts. Her hands were tied behind her back with a purse strap. A search of the dumpster uncovered a clear plastic bag containing personal items, including mail and a wallet with an identification card. Investigators discovered that Laura was not from Tampa but lived in Sebring, Florida, roughly 2 hours away. She owned a silver Toyota Tundra pickup truck, which she likely used to travel to Tampa. However, her pickup truck was not found in the parking lot near the crime scene. It was later reported as stolen and added to a law enforcement database for recovery efforts. Investigators spoke with the restaurant manager about the situation. The restaurant owners had cleaned the parking lot just 2 days before, on Wednesday. Since Laura's body was found on Friday morning, it was likely placed there between Wednesday and Friday. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy and discovered clear marks on Laura's neck, suggesting she had been strangled with a thin, rope-like object. Additional signs on her body indicated that she had been on the ground for an extended period, with noticeable discoloration of her skin. The medical examiner determined that Laura had died on Wednesday, 2 days before her body was found. Meanwhile, 1,200 miles away in Michigan, police informed Laura's family about her death. Her parents were devastated and made a 20-hour journey from Michigan to Sebring. Meanwhile, her pickup truck was still missing. The investigators knew they needed to piece together the timeline of Laura's final hours to solve the case. They aimed to uncover why Laura had traveled from Sebring to Tampa, who she had met, and the whereabouts of her pickup truck. Detectives first examined Laura's cell phone records. They found that on Wednesday, between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., she received calls but stopped answering her phone, indicating something had gone wrong. The records also revealed that she made 2 calls that morning to a man. Laura's friends identified him as her boyfriend, making him the first potential suspect. Detectives wanted to speak with he to determine when he last saw Laura and whether there were any issues in their relationship. Before they could locate Laura's boyfriend, police received a tip that Laura's pickup was seen outside a convenience store in Tampa. Detectives rushed to the store, located 3 miles from where Laura's body was found. Upon arrival, they discovered that the pickup truck was no longer there. However, both the exterior and interior of the store were equipped with surveillance cameras. The detectives hoped these would provide critical information. After reviewing the camera footage, investigators saw a pickup truck arrive and park at the store. Although they attempted to zoom in for better clarity, the video quality was poor, preventing them from identifying the driver. Once parked, a man got out of the passenger seat, indicating that there were at least 2 people in the vehicle. This man seemed aware of the cameras, as he kept his head down and wore a baseball cap. He entered the store, but again, the video quality made it impossible to see his face. The man tried to steal some beer, but store employees stopped him. After leaving the store, he returned to the pickup and sat in the passenger seat, while the driver remained in the vehicle and was not visible on the cameras. About an hour later, patrol officers found Laura's pickup truck parked on the road, showing signs of a minor accident. The same man seen in the surveillance footage was sitting in the passenger seat. Upon his arrest, he identified himself as Calvin Gary. He was on probation and wearing an ankle monitor. There was no one in the driver's seat of the pickup truck, only a pair of abandoned shoes, suggesting that the driver had run away. Laura's pickup was sent to forensics for a detailed search for any evidence while detectives began interviewing Calvin. He claimed he had obtained the truck from a man known as Hot. Calvin stated that Hot had recently arrived in the neighborhood and that they had plans to steal beer from a convenience store. When detectives asked Calvin if he knew how Hot acquired the pickup, he said he did not know. He maintained that he had no information about Laura or what had happened to her. Calvin described Hot as a relatively short African-American male. He also provided detectives with Hot's location, guiding them to a specific address. Upon arriving, the detectives found Hot hiding in a bush, trying to avoid being seen, but they spotted him. They called for him to come out. When he did, he was wearing a shirt and pants but no shoes. The detectives asked the man to identify himself, but he refused to provide his name and was uncooperative. They then requested that he walk over to their pickup truck, which was equipped with technology for quick fingerprint identification. When they scanned his fingerprint, it matched a record in their database, revealing that his real name was Gary Tyrone Danielle. He had a long criminal record and had been incarcerated 3 times. Additionally, Danielle was from Sebring, the same town where Laura lived. Because he was not wearing shoes, detectives became even more suspicious that he may have been driving Laura's pickup truck. However, at that time, the police did not have sufficient evidence to charge him with a crime, so they had to release him. The investigators then focused on Calvin Gary, who, along with Gary Danielle, had driven Laura's pickup truck. Since Calvin wore a monitoring device, law enforcement could track his whereabouts. They found that he had never gone to the dumpster where Laura's body was discovered, nor had he visited Sebring, where she lived. Because of this evidence, the police ruled him out as a suspect. After interviewing Laura's boyfriend, detectives also cleared him as a suspect thanks to his solid alibi. He told them that on the evening of Tuesday, October 16th, Laura had gone to a bar in Sebring. This detail was significant since Laura had been at the bar the night before her death, prompting detectives to visit the bar and talk to the staff. The manager revealed that Laura often stopped by for a meal since she lived nearby. The last time she had been there was on the night of Tuesday, October 16th, and she appeared to be friendly and happy, with no unusual behavior noted. Detectives discovered that the establishment had surveillance cameras that recorded everything. They reviewed the footage, which confirmed the bar manager's account. Laura was wearing the same dress as when her body was found. She was sitting at the bar, chatting with a waitress, had not ordered any alcohol, and nothing unusual was happening. She only spoke to the waitress before leaving around 11 p.m. Further investigation revealed that about 4 hours after Laura left the bar, a witness saw her with a man. Around 2:45 a.m., the witness spotted her at a gas station near a convenience store on the other side of town. At that time, Laura was in her pickup truck and appeared to be fine. There were no signs that she was in distress or needed assistance. The witness also stated that Laura drove away with a man. Investigators went to the gas station where Laura was last seen and reviewed the surveillance footage. At 2:54 a.m., they saw Gary Danielle enter the store to buy cigarettes and talk to another customer before leaving. Another camera recorded Laura's pickup truck backing out of the parking lot and onto the highway. This sighting aligned with an eyewitness report stating that they saw Danielle and Laura together at the gas station near Sebring early Wednesday morning. To find clues linking Gary Danielle to Laura's murder, investigators examined items found in a dumpster. They discovered a partially torn ATM receipt that provided details leading law enforcement to a specific ATM at a gas station in Lakeland. The receipt showed a transaction occurred at 3:30 p.m. on Wednesday, 12 hours after Laura was last seen in Sebring. Detectives then visited the gas station where the ATM was located, hoping the surveillance footage would help them solve the case. After reviewing the footage, investigators located Laura's pickup truck, but they couldn't identify who was inside. Luckily, there were several cameras, and after the truck was parked, they captured Gary Danielle getting out and walking to the store. He withdrew cash from the ATM, purchased a soda, and then left the store. Laura did not get out of the truck and was never seen, leading detectives to conclude that she was likely dead by the time Danielle returned to the truck and drove toward the location where her body was eventually discovered. Danielle was taken to the police station for questioning. At that time, the police only had evidence that he had used Laura's pickup truck, so they began asking him about it. Danielle claimed that he found an unlocked truck with the keys inside and decided to take it. He stated that was the only action he took, and he had no knowledge of who owned the pickup. He mentioned that the interior of the truck appeared normal and he didn't observe anything unusual. The detectives showed Danielle a picture of Laura and asked if he recognized her. He said he did not know her. When they inquired if he had ever met Laura in Sebring, he again replied no. They informed him that they had surveillance camera footage from a gas station in Sebring that showed him with Laura. Danielle understood that the police suspected him of Laura's murder and chose not to answer any more questions. At that point, the detectives lacked physical evidence to prove to a jury that Danielle had killed Laura. There is a specific time limit for a person to stand trial, which begins when the suspect is arrested. Since the detectives were still awaiting forensic results, they decided to release Danielle. Although there was a significant risk that he might flee, forensic analysis provided substantial insights into the case. Experts discovered drops of Laura's blood in the back seat of her pickup truck. This indicates that her body was likely in the back seat at some point after her death, or that the crime occurred inside the truck. Investigators received a forensic report on items found near Laura's body, which showed DNA on the strap used to bind her hands. This DNA matched that of Danielle. Additionally, his DNA was found under Laura's fingernails. The DNA evidence and surveillance footage were sufficient to file charges, leading to Gary Danielle's arrest. At the time of his arrest, Danielle did not make any statements and chose to exercise his right to remain silent. He faced charges of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and grand theft of a motor vehicle. Using the evidence collected, investigators attempted to create a timeline of Laura's final hours. They confirmed that she had been at a bar in Sebring alone and left the bar around 11 p.m. Following that, she went to the town center, where she met friends. On that same night, she encountered Gary Danielle for the first time, with no prior relationship between them. Investigators suspect that Laura may have agreed to give Gary Danielle a ride, possibly in exchange for money. Danielle's refusal to answer questions has left investigators uncertain about how he and Laura first met. However, it is known that Laura and Danielle were seen together at a gas station, where an eyewitness confirmed that Laura appeared alive and unharmed in her pickup truck. After leaving the gas station, something occurred that led to Laura being found strangled in her truck. The exact location of the truck at the time of her death is still unknown. 12 hours after the last sighting of Laura's truck in Sebring, surveillance cameras captured it at a gas station 25 miles outside of Tampa. At that time, Danielle was withdrawing cash from an ATM. He then drove to Tampa, where he concealed Laura's body next to a dumpster in a restaurant parking lot. Her body was discovered 2 days later. The trial for Laura's murder did not begin until nearly 3 years after her death, a delay largely due to global events. Laura's father, Art Peacher, spent a long time waiting to confront the man responsible for his daughter's death in court. Rather than condemning Danielle, he chose to remember Laura by sharing a story about her kindness. Art recalled an incident where a young boy pointed out Laura's short arm, and another boy mentioned her asthma. Laura responded, "Don't you know there's something wrong with everyone?" Her father presented several items in court that belonged to his daughter, including her journal. The cover of the journal had the phrase, "Live the life you've imagined." Inside, she had written about her dislike for cooking since she lived alone and had no one to help with the dishes. She also expressed her hatred for littering and shared her thoughts about her 4 tattoos. The most significant tattoo for her was a blackbird, which was a tribute to her sister-in-law who had passed away, inspired by a song. On August 24, 2021, Gary Danielle, age 50, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder as part of a deal with state prosecutors. In return for his plea, he accepted a 30-year prison sentence. He also confessed to charges of tampering with evidence and stealing a motor vehicle. During the short court hearing, Danielle, who is bald, has a short gray beard, and was dressed in orange jail clothing and handcuffed, remained silent in the jury box and did not address Laura Peacher's family. While the guilty plea concluded the legal proceedings, it left many questions unanswered, such as the reasons behind Laura's murder and how she came to be in contact with Danielle. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Tina Watson. Tina Watson, 26, was hesitant to share her engagement news with her parents. This was her third attempt at marriage, after her previous relationships with Scott McCulloch and Stan Marks ended. She met Gabe Watson at a Christmas Eve party and they developed a relationship after both had gone through breakups. 2 years later, Gabe proposed to Tina, who agreed to marry him if her parents gave their blessing. To win them over, Gabe planned a romantic dinner on Valentine's Day, but rescheduled for February 15th when Tina's father was available. During the dinner, Gabe made a bold announcement that he planned to spend the rest of his life with Tina. Her father then asked the seemingly straightforward question, "Gabe, do you love Tina?" However, Gabe was caught off guard and stuttered, failing to provide a clear answer. Her father wrote off Gabe's awkwardness as mere nervousness in front of strangers. The father then turned to Tina and asked the same question, but she sidestepped it. Instead, she expressed her fear of being alone at the age of 26. After a moment of contemplation, her father gave the young couple his blessing. As the wedding preparations were underway, Gabe and Tina clearly had different ideas. While Tina was busy thinking about the wedding dress, the guest list, and the entire ceremony, Gabe was focused on planning their honeymoon. He did not consider Tina's preferences for their vacation, as he had already made up his mind. Gabe had decided that they would go to the Great Barrier Reef in Australia and go scuba diving, without consulting Tina about it. Gabe and Tina had planned to explore the sunken ship, the Townsville Titanic, which sank in 1911. However, Tina was not a skilled diver, unlike Gabe, who was an experienced scuba diver with over 50 dives under his belt. He was even completing a rescue diving course. Gabe had occasionally taken Tina scuba diving in a pool, but only in calm waters and under the supervision of lifeguards. Gabe made the decision to have Tina learn to scuba dive before the honeymoon or at home. He was serious about it, and Tina felt she had no choice but to comply. Gabe even went so far as to borrow money to buy Tina her own scuba gear and pay for lessons. However, Tina's first instructor was not impressed with her skills and warned Gabe that she was not fit for open ocean diving. Gabe angrily interrupted the dive instructor, accusing him of not explaining the lesson clearly. As a result, the second instructor promptly refunded Tina for the unfinished class, and on October 11th, Tina and Gabe were married and flew to Australia just 2 days later for a lavish honeymoon paid for with a $10,000 wedding gift. Gabe's honeymoon with Tina included spending time in Sydney, where they walked around the city, visited the aquarium, and the zoo. At first, Tina was excited, but as their trip to the Great Barrier Reef approached, she became increasingly saddened. On October 21st, they flew to Townsville and in the evening boarded a boat to the Great Barrier Reef, a dream destination for many divers. According to employees at the diving company, they didn't appear to be experienced divers. Even Gabe, who had completed diving courses and had some experience, seemed unsure of how to use the equipment, as if he had never seen it before. Despite this, Gabe assisted Tina in passing her pre-dive exam, a test that is usually administered individually. Additionally, when the instructor offered to help Tina underwater, she declined the offer. The dive log noted the presence of a strong current on that day, a crucial detail that should not be overlooked. Upon arrival, Gabe assisted his wife in organizing their equipment, which they had purchased in the US, and prepared to rent scuba tanks. Gabe chose an 11-liter tank for himself, while his wife used an 8.5-liter tank, which was unusually small for the location and potentially hazardous given her limited diving experience. Their initial attempt to dive to the Townsville Titanic was unsuccessful. Tina required a weight belt to descend, and Gabe initially struggled to operate the underwater computer, which monitors the safe rate of descent and ascent, as well as the oxygen levels in the cylinders. After returning to the boat to regroup, Gabe was able to use the computer, and they made a second attempt. The wreck lay at a depth of 49 feet, and Tina made the first descent, with Gabe following close behind. At first, everything was fine, but then Tina suddenly stopped, waved at me, and signaled she wanted to ascend. I recognized this as a panic response, which she had shown before. We were halfway up the dive at this point, so I decided to stay with her at the same depth to help her calm down and get used to the pressure. However, Tina continued to breathe rapidly and deeply, which was unsafe. Gabe realized she was sinking, and Gabe tried to grab her waist to hold her in place. But she swung her arms violently, knocking Gabe's mask off his face. While Gabe was putting his mask back on, Tina quickly moved away from Gabe. Gabe tried to swim after her, but he couldn't catch up. Gabe then decided to return to the surface to get help from the lifeguards. On his way to the surface, Gabe encountered another diver who appeared unconcerned and did not respond to Gabe's distress signals. There were 2 Asian divers with Gabe at the time, but neither confirmed Gabe's claim that he had attempted to help his wife. A subsequent police investigation, including analysis of underwater computer data, revealed that Gabe had initially attempted to swim to his struggling wife, but quickly abandoned the attempt, despite the relative lack of urgency to surface. Gabe followed standard procedure, ascending gradually and pausing at predetermined depth levels. However, the other divers later stated to the police that, in their opinion, Gabe had the opportunity to save his wife but chose not to do so. Furthermore, this incident occurred at the beginning of the dive, so Gabe had sufficient oxygen in his tanks to have potentially reached the ocean floor and returned to the surface without compromising his own safety. The rescuers quickly sprang into action after locating Tina, but unfortunately, it was too late. Tina found lying on her back at 82 feet, Tina received 40 minutes of artificial respiration on the yacht's deck, but these efforts were unsuccessful. Gabe kept his distance from his wife during the incident, standing off to the side and sniffing his nose, according to witnesses. However, other passengers reported that he was friendly and even played cards with them on the way to the shore. Gabe denied this in court. The autopsy results for Tina were not entirely clear-cut. While there were no obvious signs of a violent death, there were bruises on her neck and blood in her nostrils, which could be attributed to the 82-degree depth at which her body was found. There was no alcohol in her system, but high levels of ibuprofen and paracetamol were detected, which are commonly used to treat seasickness. A small amount of fluid was also found in her lungs. The report concluded that Tina died from drowning, but it's possible that she drowned after already being deprived of oxygen. An investigation by the Australian Water Police found no malfunctions with Tina's diving gear. It would have been easy for the police to dismiss the incident as a tragic accident. A novice diver ignored safety procedures and lost his life, a sad occurrence. However, several suspicious aspects of the case made it difficult to close the case. The autopsy results were inconclusive, and the dive team reported that the deceased's husband, Gabe, had been behaving strangely, inconsistent with the usual grief response of a husband who had just lost his wife. These conflicts dragged on as the investigation progressed, and Gabe realized that the detectives were watching him very closely. Furthermore, Tina's parents were unwilling to accept that the incident was an accident and wanted to see their son-in-law held accountable for failing to help her. During the initial interview, police observed Gabe in a state of shock, exhibiting erratic behavior, including crying, laughing, and jerking around. Gabe repeatedly asked to call his father, complaining of an earache and begging him to inform Tina's parents of this. Gabe was released late at night and went to the company's yacht to request a place to stay for the night. He explained that the trip was supposed to last 2 days, but due to his wife's death, they had only been there for 24 hours. He also asked for a refund of half the cost of the dive, as he never got to see the sunken ship. On October 24th, Gabe's mother flew to Townsville to support her son and help him find a lawyer. At Gabe's request, they visited the morgue to see his wife one last time. However, because Gabe was still considered a suspect, the morgue employee alerted the detective in charge of the case, who was recording the scene without Gabe's knowledge. Gabe was overcome with grief, crying and holding his wife's hand, and apologizing for not being able to protect her. Gabe's personality was a subject of conflicting opinions. Some people described him as a kind and humorous man, while others saw him as tyrannical. However, everyone agreed that Gabe and Tina's relationship was unhappy. Tina had previously confided in her friends and family that she had married Gabe out of fear of being alone, and her friends later confirmed this after her death. A friend of Tina's also came forward with a disturbing revelation. Shortly before her death, Tina had confided in this friend that Gabe had forced her to take out a life insurance policy on herself, naming him as the beneficiary. This was corroborated by the insurance agent who had sold them the policy. Furthermore, the taxi driver who drove the newlyweds to the yacht on the day of their departure told authorities that Tina had cried the entire way, while Gabe showed no concern for her distress. Amanda Phillips shared another story that sheds light on Tina's relationship. At a Christmas party, Gabe filmed her peeing in the bathroom, edited the footage, and then played it to a group of guests. He found it funny, but the other guests were embarrassed. The incident was disturbing, but another act was even more alarming. During a funeral, Gabe removed jewelry from Tina's body. However, an even more disturbing act was caught on camera during the 2008 trial. A video showed Gabe visiting Tina's grave, taking all the flowers and throwing them into a nearby trash can. Tina's father was determined to catch the person who stole the flowers from Tina's grave. He set up a hidden camera on the next row of monuments, but was shocked to see Gabe on the footage. Gabe's defense in court was that he and his wife had discussed the death of one of their relatives during their honeymoon, and that the absence of flowers on the grave was her request. However, this explanation seems very strange and unlikely. The investigation into Tina's death might have taken much longer if the police hadn't discovered a crucial piece of evidence. Gabe claimed that Tina had drowned while he was trying to put a mask on her face, but this story didn't add up. It was impossible for someone to put a mask on underwater without an air supply, unless they were using someone else's oxygen. In this case, the police suspected that Gabe had used Tina's oxygen to stage the incident. In November 2008, the Australian police arrested Gabe, and his trial began on June 5, 2009. Gabe initially pleaded guilty to failing to save his wife. He was convicted of negligent homicide and served 18 months in prison. After his release, he returned to the U.S., but was later charged with first-degree murder in a U.S. court. The prosecution's case hinged on the idea that Gabe had intentionally killed his wife in order to collect life insurance payouts. In his defense, Gabe's lawyer argued that the diving company was responsible for the death, alleging that their employees had failed to adequately ensure the safety of the tourists in their care. The lawyer alleged that the company was now trying to shift the blame to Gabe, fearing the loss of their business license. Gabe had already served his sentence abroad, and his lawyer argued that the insurance payout of $33,000 was outweighed by the costs of hiring lawyers and obtaining additional expert opinions. The prosecutor refused to acknowledge the irony that Gabe, a trained expert in drowning rescue, was unable to save his wife. When Gabe presented his defense, he spoke directly to the jury, expressing his emotional pain and frustration. For 7 years, I have been haunted by the memory of that tragic day. The public has vilified me, accusing me of being responsible for my wife's death, labeling me a murderer. Not a single person has looked me in the eye and offered any compassion or understanding. Instead, many people want me to suffer, and I can only sympathize with my late wife's parents, who will understandably never forgive me, no matter how hard I try to make amends. While people often express sympathy for parents who lose a child, saying, "I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child," I've never heard anyone say, "I can't imagine what it's like to lose a spouse, especially on a honeymoon." I've been criticized for not doing enough to save my wife, Tina. I've already paid the price for that, and I've lived with the guilt for 7 years. Some of you might think I should have died with her, but I was afraid of death and wanted to survive. I wanted to live then, and I still want to live now. Regarding Gabe's case, the court found him not guilty due to lack of evidence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Mary Catherine Higdon. Mary Catherine Higdon, born in 1994, was a lively child who spread joy wherever she went. Her infectious laughter and humor brought delight to those around her, often with her quick wit and impressive impersonations. She loved taking leisurely strolls around town with her pet frog perched on a shoestring, proudly showing it off to everyone. From a young age, Mary had a deep appreciation for nature and animals, spending hours exploring the outdoors and marveling at the beauty of the natural world. Aside from being an entertainment enthusiast, Mary had a passion for performing. She would often stage plays for her family, captivating them with her creativity and boundless imagination. As she grew older, Mary was introduced to firearms and developed a strong interest in them. She learned the importance of handling guns responsibly, respecting their power and potential. Over time, her skills improved, and she became an accomplished marksman with a growing passion for guns. Mary Catherine met her soulmate, Stephen Freeman, in high school. Born on January 1st, 1995, in Griffin, Georgia, Stephen grew up in a close-knit family with his parents and brother. He was a happy child with many friends who described him as laid-back, kind, and helpful. Stephen's family was very important to him, especially his mother, with whom he shared a special bond. He loved spending time outdoors, enjoying activities like hiking, camping, fishing, and hunting. Mary Catherine and Stephen quickly formed a strong connection in high school, united by their shared passion for the outdoors. Their love for nature brought them together, and their relationship flourished as they explored the great outdoors, whether hiking, camping, fishing, or hunting. This connection served as the foundation of their deep and enduring relationship. Mary Catherine and Stephen's high school graduation marked the start of a new era in their lives as a couple. They decided to take their relationship to the next level by moving in together in a house in Griffin, Georgia. The couple was ecstatic about having their own space and starting a new life. Mary Catherine had become an integral part of Stephen's family, with his mother treating her like a daughter. She welcomed Mary Catherine into their family with open arms, and the couple felt grateful for her love and support. Every Sunday, Mary Catherine and Stephen would visit Stephen's parents for a big family dinner. This weekly tradition brought the family closer together and solidified Mary Catherine's place within it. Over time, Stephen's friends also grew to appreciate Mary Catherine. Initially, they had reservations about the couple's relationship, but as they spent more time together, they realized how well suited the pair were. They admired how Mary Catherine brought happiness and joy into Stephen's life and shared his passion for the outdoors. Stephen, a metal worker, repaired roofs. His wife, Mary Catherine, had 2 jobs, part-time teacher's assistant and sales at a sporting goods store, where she learned gun safety from coworker Thomas Skinner. This complemented Stephen's passion for firearms as an avid hunter and target shooter with multiple guns, including a Glock 42 at home for protection. By summer 2018, Mary Catherine and Stephen had been in a 5-year relationship in Griffin, Georgia. Tragically, it came to an end on August 1st. That day, Mary Catherine made a frantic 911 call, screaming that she had accidentally shot Stephen. When police arrived at their apartment, they found Mary Catherine in a state of distress, crying and hyperventilating over Stephen's motionless body. Despite his still being alive with a chest wound, Mary Catherine was screaming that she couldn't lose him. An ambulance rushed Stephen to the hospital, where doctors made efforts to save his life. But unfortunately, he eventually succumbed to his injuries. Mary Catherine visited the police station to explain the shooting incident. She claimed that she had accidentally shot Stephen while handing him a gun, which he normally kept beside his bed for protection. However, the police officers detected the smell of alcohol on her breath and noticed discrepancies in her account, which shifted from handing the gun to tossing it. The police were skeptical, knowing that a tossed gun would not fire on its own, and the nature of the wound suggested that Mary Catherine had deliberately pointed the gun at Stephen. During the interview, Mary Catherine eventually confessed that she had acted out of anger. Although the police had recorded the interview, there was only feedback during the crucial moment when she admitted to shooting Stephen out of anger. Nevertheless, despite the missing recording, the police were convinced that they had collected sufficient forensic evidence to prove that Mary Catherine had intentionally shot her boyfriend Stephen. At the apartment of Mary Catherine and Stephen, police found evidence of a heated argument before Stephen was shot. Scattered food suggested a prior altercation. This was the 6th time police had been called to the residence in the past year due to domestic disturbances. Despite Mary Catherine's claims, the gun used in the shooting was found to have been loaded that night. Traces of grease on the gun and magazine led the police to conclude that Mary Catherine, who was cooking dinner at the time, had loaded the weapon after shooting Stephen. Stephen's friends told police their relationship was marked by frequent arguments, possessiveness, and verbal abuse from Mary Catherine. Friends saw her as mentally unstable, causing tension. When Stephen tried to distance himself, she'd bombard him with texts and calls, forcing him to block her. One friend revealed Mary Catherine pulled a gun on Stephen multiple times, but he didn't report it, fearing trouble for her. Stephen's friends were stunned when they learned that Mary Catherine had accidentally shot him, especially since they knew she was familiar with firearms. However, what they were unaware of was that 3 months earlier, Stephen had confided in a friend that Mary Catherine had a disturbing episode where she ran around outside, screaming at the top of her lungs, and even attempted to shoot both him and herself. Furthermore, just a month before the incident, Stephen had shared with another friend that although Mary Catherine had previously threatened him with a gun, this time her eyes had a look that genuinely terrified him, making him believe she might actually carry out her threat. Stephen's friends told police he'd been tired of Mary Catherine's behavior and planned to leave her after 7 years. He intended to move away without telling her, fearing her reaction. On July 30th, 2018, Stephen sent Mary Catherine a friendly text, but the next night, he ignored her calls and texts after a fight. Mary Catherine was cooking dinner when she noticed Stephen was missing. She called his mom, who said he was with a friend. Enraged, Mary Catherine drove to the friend's house to confront him. When she arrived, she saw Stephen in the truck and began yelling at him. He tried to calm her down, saying he was heading home. Stephen's friend said Mary Catherine pulled a gun on him multiple times, but she denied it. She admitted threatening suicide with a gun, though. His mom believed Mary Catherine's threats kept Stephen from leaving, fearing she'd harm herself if he did. Mary Catherine said Stephen escalated the situation, becoming violent, throwing dinner in her face. She claimed self-defense, grabbing a gun to scare him off, but he lunged at her, and as she backed away, she saw he was bleeding from the chest. At the time of the shooting, Mary Catherine didn't share her account of events with the police because she was too embarrassed to reveal that Stephen had a history of violence towards her, including hitting her in the past and being controlling. In fact, she claimed that on one occasion, he kicked her out of bed so forcefully that her head hit the door frame. However, Stephen's friends described their relationship differently, saying they had seen Mary Catherine hit Stephen, including an incident where she slapped him hard in the face. By contrast, Mary Catherine's sister offered a different view, stating that 2 weeks before the shooting, she had seen bruises on Mary Catherine's arm. Mary Catherine's sister said Mary Catherine confided in her about Stephen's physical attack. The police investigation found Stephen's death was a murder. Mary Catherine was arrested and charged with murder and other crimes. She refused a plea deal and chose to go to trial, claiming she shot Stephen in self-defense to protect herself from his aggression. A year after Stephen's death, Mary Catherine's trial began, revealing the tumultuous nature of their relationship. Her defense team argued that she acted in self-defense, citing Stephen's history of aggressive and abusive behavior as justification for her actions. To support their claim, they presented evidence to the jury that demonstrated Stephen's controlling, manipulative, and dangerous nature, which had led Mary Catherine to fear for her safety. Mary Catherine testified tearfully about years of abuse by Stephen, recounting a disturbing pattern of physical, mental, emotional, verbal, and sexual mistreatment. She described his attacks, belittling, and disregard for her humanity, saying his abuse knew no bounds, leaving her trapped and terrified. Mary Catherine's defense presented a text from Stephen, saying he'd punish her when he got home. Mary Catherine testified that meant physical abuse, and if she defended herself, he'd hit her harder. Another text shown in court read, "Don't hit me, or I'll hit you back 2 times harder." Mary Catherine testified that Stephen had a red room, like in 50 Shades of Grey, where they had aggressive and violent sex. She provided a text from Stephen saying, "You're going to the red room," to back her claim. Mary Catherine also alleged Stephen assaulted her twice, once after a Disney World trip, saying she felt uncomfortable with their increasingly aggressive sex and asked him to stop. But he intensified his efforts, claiming she owed him for gifts. The defense presented text messages from Stephen to support Mary Catherine's abuse claims. These messages were vulgar, threatening, and showed a pattern of verbal assaults. Over 60 pages of messages showcased Stephen's abuse, including one disturbing message where he held a dead fish, captioned, "This is you." Another message presented to the court was one from Stephen after Mary Catherine cheated on him, in which he wrote that he was going to wreck her for wrecking him. Furthermore, the defense alleged that Stephen had a drug and alcohol addiction that contributed to his violent outbursts. Mary Catherine said she broke up with Stephen, not the other way around. She claimed he got angry and threatened her, so she grabbed a gun in self-defense. Her last words to him before firing were, "Get out of my house." Stephen's friends and family disputed Mary Catherine's claims that he was violent and abusive, knowing him as friendly and caring. His mom denied knowledge of disturbing texts and threats, but claimed he only said hurtful things out of anger. Mary Catherine was questioned about not reporting Stephen's alleged abuse. The state also pointed out she searched for violent, explicit images online hours before the shooting, claiming she did it to please Stephen. The state argued she'd changed her story about the shooting at least 10 times since her initial interview. Evidence in court included a text from Stephen to Mary Catherine, saying she'd previously pointed a gun at him, and his friends testified about witnessing her abuse towards him, supporting the state's claim that she was violent towards him, not the other way around. Jurors deliberated for 4 hours before acquitting Mary Catherine of malice murder, felony murder, and lesser charges. Shocked family and friends expected a guilty verdict, but jurors later revealed they believed Mary Catherine intentionally killed Stephen. However, they couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt due to lack of evidence, making it hard to distinguish murder from self-defense.